Welcome to Cyber Safety Lesson 2, Cybersecurity, Ethics, and Legal Responsibility. In this lesson, we're looking at how cybersecurity connects to professionalism, ethical responsibility, and client trust. As designers, we often think about the visual parts of our work: color, layout, typography, and concept development. But along the way, we also handle client assets that contain strategy, research, internal ideas, and files that may not be ready for public release. How we store, share, and protect these materials plays a direct role in how clients view our reliability. Cybersecurity in design isn't just about technical protection. It reflects how we respect privacy, ownership, and the trust clients place in us when they invite us into their creative process. Let's begin by looking at what we're aiming to accomplish in this session. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to recognize key ethical and legal responsibilities in client and media work and explain how secure practices support trust and accountability. You'll also learn practical ways to protect client and consumer rights and communicate your standards clearly, whether you're working independently or with a team. These skills support strong communication, ethical design habits, and respectful client relationships. As we move through the examples in this lesson, think about how they relate to your own workflow and where simple adjustments might make your process more secure and intentional. Before we go further, take a moment to think about how ethics and responsibility show up in your design work. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to decide what was truly right for a client, not just what was fastest or most convenient? Think about how you handle client files, creative ideas, and data. Do you keep them in secure locations, or do they sometimes end up on shared or personal devices where others might access them? And how familiar are you with the privacy laws and agreements that protect that information? Not just NDAs, but the expectations behind them? Jot down a few thoughts, or keep them in mind. We'll revisit these questions at the end of the lesson to see how your perspective has developed. As you think about how you already handle client materials, it's important to understand why those choices matter. Designers may not manage full legal compliance, but the information we handle still affects real people and real businesses. Designers manage data and creative property that carry both personal and legal value, and how we handle those materials can either protect or put at risk a client's rights to their own work. Projects often include strategy documents, internal timelines, drafts that aren't ready to be seen publicly, or data that reveals how a client operates behind the scenes. When we treat that information responsibly, we're supporting more than security. We're supporting trust and protecting the rights our clients have to their own creative property. Handling information with care shows clients that you value their ideas and the investment behind them, even before a project launches. When clients feel confident that their work is handled carefully, they're more comfortable sharing long-term projects, sensitive materials, and details that require discretion. Security and professionalism work together. The more intentional we are with how we handle information, the more our choices support both creative freedom and professional integrity. Those habits help maintain credibility over time, not just in one project. Let's look at how these considerations show up in real-world decisions. Not every ethical decision feels like a major turning point. Sometimes it shows up in small choices throughout the design process. You might share client assets across multiple platforms without thinking about how many places those files now live. You might try a new AI tool and upload sensitive project data without checking how that tool stores or uses it. You might reuse design elements from a previous client because they fit perfectly, or store files on a personal or public device so they're easier to access. These choices can feel efficient in the moment, but they may cross boundaries related to ownership, privacy, or consent. When a choice gives you pause, it can help to slow down and think about the impact. Would this action respect your client's expectations? Would it protect their information and their trust? Ethical design isn't about following rigid rules. It's about being thoughtful, especially when a shortcut seems easier. Every decision reflects your values and professionalism. Next, we'll look at some of the laws that help guide these decisions. Even if you aren't responsible for writing contracts or managing compliance, understanding the purpose of privacy laws helps you make informed choices. Regulations like the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, are European laws that safeguard consumer data worldwide by giving people control over how their information is collected and used. The California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, sets similar expectations in the United States by requiring transparency and user control over personal data. And non disclosure agreements, or NDAs, along with other contracts, outline confidentiality terms that protect creative work and client assets as they move through your workflow. You don't need to memorize legal language. What matters is recognizing why these frameworks exist to support transparency, respect consent, and keep sensitive information safe. When you're unsure, a helpful question to ask is, does this choice respect privacy and the client's right to control their information? With that foundation in mind, let's look at a real example of what can happen when those protections fail. In 2019, British Airways experienced a security breach that exposed customer payment information. Because the company failed to meet GDPR requirements, it faced a significant fine and public criticism. For a large brand, the financial cost was serious, but the bigger impact was the loss of trust from customers who expected their information to be protected. Even though the situation occurred on a massive scale, the core issue applies to individual designers as well. When information is handled carelessly, whether through weak security settings or poor file sharing practices, it can affect how people view your reliability and your attention to detail. The lesson here is that security isn't just about preventing technical failures. It's about demonstrating care for the people who rely on you to protect their information. Let's look at how these responsibilities translate into everyday design roles. Even when teams or agencies manage formal compliance, designers make decisions that directly affect security. Where you store files, which tools you use, and who you share access with all influence how safely information travels through a project. In practice, that means a few simple things: handling files through approved, secure systems rather than random personal tools, clarifying ownership and usage rights early in the project, and respecting confidentiality clauses in everything you create or share. These habits help you avoid both ethical and legal problems, even when you're not the one writing the contracts. Consider situations like uploading client materials to a personal cloud drive, forwarding a draft to a personal email account, or using a platform that doesn't have strong security controls. These choices may seem small, but they can expose confidential materials to unnecessary risk. Legal awareness isn't just about staying out of trouble, it's about building habits that show clients you value their trust. Clear, secure workflows help protect privacy and demonstrate that you take responsibility for the materials you handle. To see how this plays out in practice, let's look at a scenario involving creative ownership. Imagine a freelancer reusing artwork created for a previous client in a new project because it fits perfectly. The new client loves the result, but the original client still owns the rights to that work. What felt like a time-saving decision quickly becomes a legal and ethical issue. A more responsible approach is to pause before reusing past work. You might reach out to the original client to request permission, confirm ownership details, or create something new to avoid conflict. Protecting ownership isn't just about following the law. It shows that you respect the creative investment clients make when they hire you. When in doubt, prioritize transparency and consent. Those moments of care build credibility over time. Next, let's look at another real example that highlights the impact of overlooked security settings. Even major companies with strong reputations can overlook security details. In 2019, Adobe accidentally left part of a database unprotected, exposing millions of user records. No passwords were taken, but the incident raised a bigger concern. If a trusted software company could make a mistake like this, how many smaller organizations might overlook similar settings? For designers, the takeaway isn't that technology fails, it's that simple oversights can create real consequences. When we handle client assets, we rely on tools and platforms to support our workflow, but choosing secure options and checking settings remains part of our responsibility. A quick review of permissions or storage settings can prevent information from being viewed by people who were never meant to access it. This example also reminds us that trust is built over time, but can be shaken by a single oversight. When clients work with you, they're trusting you to be attentive, not only to the design itself, but to the systems that support your work. Let's look at another example that shows how risk can come from the people we collaborate with. In 2013, Target experienced a major data breach that began through a third-party vendor. One weak point in the vendor's security allowed attackers to access broader systems, exposing customer information across the company. For designers, this highlights something we often overlook. Security isn't limited to our personal devices or accounts. It also extends to the tools, vendors, and collaborators we work with. Maybe you send files to a printer that stores everything in an unprotected drive, or share drafts with a partner who doesn't secure their accounts. When one part of the workflow isn't protected, the entire project can become vulnerable. Thinking about security as a shared responsibility helps maintain trust not only with clients, but across the teams and partners you work with. Now that we've looked at real world risks, let's connect this back to ethics, not just compliance. Legal requirements set the baseline, but ethical choices often reach farther. Doing the right thing might mean double checking permission before reusing assets, storing files in a secure folder instead of a personal drive, or explaining how you'll protect sensitive information even when no one asks. These actions show character, not just compliance. When clients see that you take initiative to protect their work because it matters, not because a contract forces you to, they're more likely to trust you with future projects. Legal protection keeps information safe. Ethical choices keep relationships strong. Together, they support long-term professional credibility. Next, we'll look at a simple framework to help guide these decisions when situations aren't clear. When you're unsure how to handle a situation, it can help to step back and ask a few guiding questions. Start with the basics. Is this legal? Then consider whether the action aligns with ethical responsibility. Does it respect privacy, consent, and ownership? You might also ask whether the client would be comfortable with the choice and whether it could affect trust in the long term. These questions aren't meant to slow you down. They're meant to help you pause before a quick decision turns into a problem. Ethical decision-making is a skill that develops through experience. The more you practice checking your instincts, the easier it becomes to make choices that support both creativity and professionalism. Let's look at a contract element that often supports those decisions in real client work. Contracts and non-disclosure agreements set expectations, not only about ownership and usage rights, but about how information should be handled throughout the project. They outline what should stay private, who has permission to use certain materials, and what happens to assets once the project is complete. Before signing, take time to read these agreements closely. If you're not sure what something means, ask questions or request clarification. It's easier to clear up misunderstandings at the beginning than to repair a relationship later. Following these agreements isn't just about legal compliance, it shows that you honor commitments and respect the boundaries your clients set. That care builds trust over time. Now let's look at a small real-world situation where confidentiality matters more than convenience. Imagine a designer forwarding a client's contact list to a personal email account so they can work from home. It feels like a simple workaround, but that one action can break confidentiality and expose private information, especially if the personal account lacks strong security or ends up compromised. A better approach would be to keep professional materials within approved systems and platforms that have proper protections in place. Keeping work separate from personal accounts isn't just a technical choice, it reflects respect for the client and the trust they placed in you. Even small decisions tell clients how seriously you take their information. Next, we'll shift from data to the creative assets themselves and how we protect the work clients own. Creative assets aren't just files, they're intellectual property. Logos, mock-ups, brand guides, campaign concepts, and even early drafts all hold value, and clients trust you to handle that work responsibly. Protecting those assets means storing them securely, keeping versions organized, and making sure only the right people have access. It also means recognizing that client work isn't yours to reuse or share unless you've been given permission. Even if you were the designer who created the piece, ownership usually belongs to the client once it's delivered, depending on the contract. When you treat a client's creative materials with the same respect you'd want others to give your own, you're reinforcing professionalism through your actions, not just your design work. With that in mind, let's look at how these values show up in real decisions, not just in policies. Remember that these project files and strategy documents are also forms of intellectual property. They belong to the clients who created or commissioned them. Now consider a situation where a client asks you to share another client's project files or strategy documents so they can use them as a reference. On the surface, it might seem like a harmless comparison, especially if you're trying to be helpful or efficient. But sharing those materials crosses an ethical boundary, even if the files aren't particularly sensitive. A stronger approach would be to explain that you can't share another client's private materials, then guide the conversation toward creating something original that meets the new client's needs. It's a small moment, but choices like this demonstrate integrity and reinforce trust over time. Sometimes professionalism shows up in the polite, firm boundaries you hold, not only in the final work you produce. Next, let's talk about how communication helps reinforce those values before problems arise. Ethical choices are easier to follow when everyone understands the expectations from the start. Communicating how you'll store files, share drafts, and handle sensitive information helps clients feel confident in your process. You might include a brief data protection overview in a proposal, discuss file sharing tools during onboarding, or set clear guidelines about what can and cannot be shared. Talking about these details early doesn't just protect information, it shows clients that you're intentional about the way you work. When transparency becomes part of your communication style, clients don't just see you as creative, they see you as trustworthy. Strong relationships aren't built only through great design, they're built through clarity and respect along the way. Now let's look at another large-scale example that highlights why updates and security habits matter. In 2017, Equifax, one of the major credit reporting agencies, experienced a massive data breach after failing to install a critical security update. The result was the exposure of sensitive personal information for millions of people. The technical issue itself was serious, but the larger concern was how preventable it was. One delayed update led to a national loss of trust that took years to rebuild. This example reminds us that security isn't only about responding to problems, it's about maintaining consistent habits. Even small actions like installing updates, using strong authentication, or reviewing settings before sharing files can prevent far-reaching consequences. As designers, we may not manage large networks, but we do make decisions that affect client data. The tools we use, how often we update them, and where we store our work all contribute to a safer workflow. Protecting information isn't just the responsibility of IT teams, it's something we participate in every day. Now let's connect these lessons back to your daily creative process. Ethics aren't limited to major decisions. They show up in small habits throughout your design process. That might look like using approved file sharing tools instead of random personal accounts, asking before you reuse or repurpose assets, keeping projects organized and private, and maintaining confidentiality at every step. Those routine choices shape how trustworthy your workflow feels to clients. Using approved platforms, keeping sensitive materials private, labeling files clearly, and backing up work responsibly are all simple habits that reinforce credibility. When your daily practices align with ethical responsibility, you build a reputation for reliability. Long before a contract or deadline comes into play, take a moment to think about your own workflow. What's one habit you already follow that protects privacy and trust? And what's one small adjustment you could make moving forward? Let's connect those habits to the larger framework of professionalism. Legal compliance sets a foundation. It protects you and defines minimum standards. Ethical choices elevate that foundation by showing clients that you care about their work, not just the rules surrounding it. When you combine both, you create professional integrity. Integrity isn't built in a single moment. It develops through every secure link you send, every file you label carefully, and every conversation where you clarify how information will be handled. These choices communicate respect, accountability, and consistency. Professional credibility grows through trust, and trust grows through daily habits that align with both values and responsibility. With that in mind, let's wrap up with the key ideas from today's lesson. Let's bring this lesson together. Laws define a minimum standard for protecting information, but ethical choices help you go further by building trust and demonstrating care. Respecting privacy laws and contracts protects both your clients and their creative work. Ethical awareness transforms cybersecurity from a checklist into a professional value, something you bring into every project, not just when a rule requires it. Transparency, consent, and confidentiality are essential parts of professionalism. Protecting intellectual property, honoring contracts, and communicating expectations clearly all support long-term professional relationships. When these habits become part of your everyday workflow, integrity in your daily actions shapes your credibility as a designer. Strong ethics don't limit creativity. They give clients confidence in the way you work. Let's take a moment to reflect on how this connects to your own process. Think back to the questions you considered at the beginning of this lesson. Has anything about your perspective shifted? Maybe you're more aware of how small decisions, like choosing where to store files or how to share them, can influence trust and confidentiality. What's one step you can take this week to strengthen your workflow? It might be reviewing who has access to shared folders, updating passwords, or taking a closer look at how different tools store your data. Small, consistent actions build stronger habits, and stronger habits help create a reliable, ethical foundation for your work. As you continue designing for clients, keep noticing these moments. They're often easy to overlook, but they play a big role in how you're perceived professionally. You've now completed Cyber Safety Lesson 2, Cybersecurity, Ethics, and Legal Responsibility. Remember, professionalism isn't defined only by visual quality, it also comes from how responsibly you handle the work that clients trust you with. Every secure choice you make reinforces your reliability and protects the relationships you build in the creative field.